October 2004. A Toowoomba boardroom in central Queensland. Australia's largest coach company decides to delete its own name. 63 years on the highway, 52% of the national market, 2.5 million passengers a year. McCafferty's, built by the Mayor of Toowoomba, named for him, painted on every long-distance highway in Australia, chose to brand itself out of existence. The buses still ran. The depots still opened. But the gold and blue livery was painted over in red. And the name on the side of the coach belonged to someone else. This is not a foreign takeover story. There was no Atlanta, no London, no asset stripper from Sydney. The decision was made by Australians in Toowoomba for purely commercial reasons. Australia's worst road crash sits in the middle of this story. The 1938 Bedford bus that started it all is now parked at Wellcamp Airport. Chapter 1. The Milk Cart. The Great Depression hit Toowoomba, Queensland in 1929. A 15-year-old boy named Jack McCafferty was selling newspapers at the railway station and running deliveries for the local butcher. Then the butcher couldn't pay him. The newspapers stopped selling. There was no work at all for a Catholic boy without a trade in a regional Queensland town that had lost its market. His father knew the railway. James McCafferty was an engine driver for the Queensland Railways, the man at the throttle of the locomotives that hauled wheat and wool and people up and down the Darling Downs. The family had moved from Brisbane to Warwick in 1919, then to Toowoomba in 1925, following the work. Jack was 11 when they reached Toowoomba. He was 15 when the Depression caught him, so he bought a horse. The horse came with a cart. The cart held milk cans. Jack started a milk round in the suburb of Wilsonton, on the western edge of Toowoomba, selling milk door to door before dawn. When the horse got tired, he bought a Chevrolet utility. He drove out to the dairy farms on the Toowoomba range and bought milk where it was cheapest. He drove it back into town and sold it at a premium. He was 22. He had a Chevrolet, a milk run, and the beginning of a commercial instinct that would carry him to the end of his life. Buy where it's cheap. Sell where it's needed. Find a route nobody else is running. Show up on time. In 1939, the war began. The Cabinet introduced petrol rationing in September 1940. The milk margin disappeared. Jack sold the round to a competitor and took a job at the Toowoomba pasteurised milk factory. He hated it. By early 1940, he was looking for something else. He found a bus run. The route ran from the centre of Toowoomba out to Picnic Point on the edge of the escarpment, where the city's families went on Sundays to look down across the Lockyer Valley. The previous operator, Humbert Burke, was selling. The vehicle was a Rio, 35 seats, 27 horsepower. The fare was 6p. Jack McCafferty learned commercial transport from his father's locomotive cab. He would never sit in one professionally. But by the time he sold his first bus ticket, he had spent 15 years watching how Queensland moved people from one town to another. The Queensland Railway was about to lose its monopoly on the Darling Downs, and the boy with the milk cart was about to become the man with the bus. Chapter 2. The War Years. This chapter requires a confession. The standard biographical record of Jack McCafferty becomes thin between 1940 and 1945. The Australian Dictionary of Biography records it directly. The war years were difficult for McCafferty, who struggled to support his young family with his fledgling business. A Toowoomba Chronicle feature from the 14th of March 1953 begins. For many trying years during the war, he managed to, and the digitised newspaper archive cuts off mid-sentence. This much is documented. Jack McCafferty did not serve in the Australian Armed Forces during the Second World War. The Department of Veterans Affairs' nominal role returns no record. Transport was a reserved occupation from 1939. Bus and railway operators were exempted from call-up. He stayed in Toowoomba. He married Lorna Myrtle Schultz on 13th January 1941 at the Salvation Army headquarters in Brisbane. She was a Lutheran. He was a Catholic. The wedding venue was a compromise. 6 children would follow. He married 3 months before he bought his first bus. While Jack was running a Rio to Picnic Point, the Australian Army was making Toowoomba the busiest small city in the country. In April 1942, the Australian First Army was formed under Lieutenant General John Dudley Laverack, headquartered in Toowoomba. Harristown housed the 3rd Australian Advanced Ordnance Depot. Kabala hosted the 1st Army's Transport School. By the end of 1942, Toowoomba was a major United States military staging and rest and recreation post. Nearly 1 million US troops passed through Australia between 1941 and 1945. We have searched for evidence that McCafferty's coaches carried Army troops or American GIS. We have not found it. Rail handled approximately 95% of military passenger traffic north of Brisbane during the war. McCafferty's coordinated bus rail link did not begin until 1946. We have searched for women drivers on Jack's payroll, a McCafferty's plant honour roll, a war casualty list, a wartime defence contract. We have not found them either. What we have is the Toowoomba Chronicles phrase, "For many trying years during the war, he managed to." Whatever he managed, he did on rationed petrol with a young wife and a young family, while the city around him filled with soldiers. The REO kept running. Lorna held the family together. He did not fight in the war. He survived it. By the time the petrol ration came off in 1950, Jack McCafferty had 8 buses. Chapter 3. April Fool's Day. The McCafferty Company would always say it started on April Fool's Day, the 1st of April, 1940. The story Jack told for the rest of his life. He celebrated the company's 50th anniversary on the 1st of April, 1990. The press releases said 1940. The autobiography he co-wrote in 1995, McCafferty, King of the Road, said 1940. The Toowoomba mythology said 1940. The archive disagrees. The Australian Dictionary of Biography, in its 2023 entry by historian M. French, records that Jack bought a suburban bus run in East Toowoomba in 1941. A researcher writing on BusAustralia.com, citing the previous operator's grandson, narrows it. Jack bought the Picnic Point City service from Humbert Burke during June 1941. This documentary preserves both dates. The legend says April Fool's Day 1940. The archive says June 1941. The fleet records say he had 8 buses by 1946. Whichever date you use, the Toowoomba boy who couldn't find Depression-era work had built a regional transport network before he turned 32. The REO carried 35 passengers. By 1942, Jack was running a second route. By 1944, 4. By 1946, 8 buses, including a 44-seat Mack he had bought from a wrecker and rebuilt by hand. The depot was a shed beside the Queensland Railway line on Anzac Avenue. The mechanic was Jack himself. In 1946, with the petrol ration lifting and the railway timetable shrinking, Jack launched the McCafferty's Metrolink, a coordinated bus and rail service from Toowoomba into Brisbane. The bus took you from your front door to the Toowoomba railway station. The train took you to Roma Street. The connection was timed. The transfer was free. The fare was a single 6-pence ticket from Toowoomba to Brisbane City. It was the modern formula, door to platform to platform to door. The Queensland Railway had no answer. It still ran trains, but it could no longer claim the train was the only way to get from a Toowoomba house to a Brisbane meeting. By 1955, Jack was running a Toowoomba to Gold Coast service. By 1958, he had 20 buses. The coach captain, Jack's term, never driver, wore a uniform. The fleet was livery painted in white with blue trim. The Toowoomba boy, who couldn't find Depression-era work, had built a regional transport company before he turned 45. He had not yet been mayor. He had not yet bought his first interstate route. He had not yet seen the highway that would later kill 35 of his passengers. The bus depot was about to outgrow Toowoomba. Chapter 4. The Mayor. In April 1955, Jack McCafferty was elected as an alderman to the Toowoomba Borough Council. In 1958, he became the city's 58th mayor. He held the office for 9 consecutive years until 1967. There is no parallel in the Lost Legacy catalogue. No other founder we have documented held elected civic office while running the company that bore his name. Most of our founders had to choose between the workshop and the council chamber. Jack did both, simultaneously, for 9 years. The autobiography records his daily schedule: 6 o'clock at the depot, 9 o'clock at Toowoomba City Hall, presiding over council, 4:30 back at the depot for the afternoon timetable review. He led sing-alongs on his own coaches. In 1964, the council voted to name a recreation reserve on the western edge of Toowoomba after him. McCafferty Park. He attended the dedication while still in office. The man had a park named after himself by the council that voted for it while he chaired the meeting that voted. The Toowoomba of the 1960s was a booming regional city of 40,000. The Toowoomba Foundry, 4 kilometres south of McCafferty Park, was running at peak capacity under the Griffiths family, producing Southern Cross windmills and Queensland Railways locomotive parts. 2 Toowoomba industrial dynasties, one making windmills and locomotives, one making bus routes, peaked at the same time in the same town. If you have watched our Toowoomba Foundry video, you know what happened to the Griffiths family. They sold to National Consolidated in 1987. The foundry closed in 2012. The Griffiths name is gone from the town it built. The McCafferty story would take longer to end, and it would end stranger. But it would end in the same town. In December 1980, Jack launched McCafferty's first interstate service, Brisbane to Sydney. The route ran overnight along the Pacific Highway, with 2 coach captains rotating at Coffs Harbour. By 1992, the network reached Adelaide and Darwin. On 26 May 1995, the company launched Perth-Darwin across the Nullarbor. By the mid-1990s, McCafferty's was running more than 1,000 services a week across 15 terminals, from Adelaide to Townsville. The staff list ran to 600. The fleet was gold and blue. The flagship overnight from Sydney to Brisbane was called the Daylight Pacific. In the 1994 to 1995 financial year, McCafferty's carried 2.5 million passengers. It held 52% of the Australian express coach market. Gross revenue was $43 million, up 25% on the previous year. The Mayor of Toowoomba was running Australia's largest family-owned coach company. He received the Order of Australia Medal in 1992. His autobiography appeared in 1995. Its title was McCafferty, King of the Road. The man who sang on his own buses had won. But 4 days before Christmas 1989, on a stretch of the Pacific Highway, 12 kilometres north of Kempsey, his company would suffer the worst road accident in Australian history. Chapter 5. Kempsey, 22nd December 1989. This chapter has to be told carefully. At 20 to 3 on the morning of the 22nd of December 1989, a McCafferty's coach travelling south from Brisbane to Sydney collided head-on with a Trans-City Express coach travelling north from Sydney to Brisbane. The collision happened at Clybucca Flat on the Pacific Highway, 12 kilometres north of Kempsey in New South Wales. Both vehicles were Denning Landseers. Both were full. The combined closing speed was approximately 200 kilometres per hour. Neither coach was speeding. Neither driver had been drinking. 35 people died. 41 were injured. It remains the worst road accident in Australian history. The coroner was Kevin Waller. The finding was that the McCafferty's coach captain had fallen asleep at the wheel and drifted across the centre line. There was no other explanation. 8 weeks earlier, on the same Pacific Highway, 21 people had died at Cowper near Grafton. 56 lives on a single stretch of road in 8 weeks. Coroner Waller renewed calls for the Pacific Highway to be dual carriage from Hexham to the Queensland border. That work would not be complete for 30 years. The first responder was Ray Walkden, the duty officer at the Macleay Valley branch of the Volunteer Rescue Association. He was telephoned at 3:15. He was on the scene by 3:35. He was at the wreckage continuously until 7 o'clock that evening. 16 hours. Ray Walkden was at the wreckage from 3:15 in the morning until 7 that evening. 16 hours. The rebuilt McCafferty's coach that killed 35 people was rebuilt and put back on the road. There is a second beat in this story. Trans-City Express, the operator of the other coach, collapsed in March 1992, 2 years and 3 months after Kempsey. Its fleet was auctioned off. McCafferty's was among the buyers. McCafferty's bought 3 Trans-City coaches. One of them was the rebuilt Brisbane-bound vehicle, the other side of the Clybucker flat collision. Both rebuilt coaches from Australia's worst road crash ended up owned, painted and operated by the company whose driver had caused it. Read that again. Among the passengers on the southbound McCafferty's coach that night was a 12-year-old girl travelling from Brisbane to Sydney with her father and her 15-year-old brother. Her father did not survive. Her brother was flown to Royal North Shore Hospital. The 12-year-old survived. She is now a woman in her late 40s. We will not name her. They have already had their grief documented by every newspaper in Australia. What we will say is this. The coach captains of McCafferty's were proud men. Their uniforms were ironed. Their boss sang on his own buses. Jack's mantra to every new captain was simple. There can be many excuses for running late, but there is no excuse for running early. The drivers were not over hours. They were not drinking. They were not speeding. They were tired, and one of them was tired enough to die at the wheel. The company would survive. It would peak 6 years after Kempsey, with 2.5 million passengers and 52% of the market. The Pacific Highway would be widened. The coach captains would be retrained. The gold and blue Dennings would keep running. But Kempsey would never leave. Every overnight passenger boarding a McCafferty's coach to Sydney after 1989 thought of Clybucker Flat as the coach crossed it. And on the exact same date, 14 years later, the 22nd of December 2003, the same rebuilt McCafferty's coach was involved in another head-on collision on the Bruce Highway near Rockhampton. This time with a truck. 6 minor injuries. No deaths. The coach was written off. The same date. The same coach. The highway never forgets. Chapter 6. Going National. By 1990, McCafferty's was a national company in everything except its self-image. It had survived Kempsey. It had retrained its drivers. It was about to celebrate its 50th anniversary, counting from the 1940 founding date. Jack had always claimed. The 1990 anniversary livery, painted by Toowoomba bodybuilder Motorcoach Australia, was a 2-tone golden blue scheme that would become the company's permanent identity. Gold above the windows, blue below. The McCafferty's name in white script along both sides. By 1993, the Sydney-Adelaide and Darwin-Perth corridors had opened. The Toowoomba family company crossed every state border and reached every capital city except Hobart. On the 17th of March 1995, a 30-second television commercial began airing across regional Western Australia. A gold and blue McCafferty's coach burst out of a map of Western Australia. A photograph of Jack appeared in the corner. The Hello, Western Australia jingle played over the animation. On the 26th of May 1995, the inaugural Perth-Darwin service departed, code-sharing with the Indian Pacific across the Nullarbor. The Western Australia operation lasted 13 months. By mid-1996, the service was withdrawn. The bigger systemic problem was not geographic, it was deregulatory. At midnight on the 30th of October 1990, the Hawke government's reform of Australian aviation took effect. The two-airline policy, the regulation that had kept Ansett and Trans-Australia Airlines in matched routes and matched fares for 38 years, was terminated. Within 12 months, every domestic Australian airfare was under price competition. Within 10 years, the long-distance coach was competing against the cost of an airline ticket with 3 times the travel time. In 1992, the Keating government commissioned the Hilmer Review. Its recommendations became the Competition Policy Reform Act of 1995, systematically removing the barriers that had protected Australian regional transport monopolies for 50 years. McCafferty's peak revenue year, 1994 to 1995, was also the year the Competition Policy Reform Act passed Parliament. The company had reached its summit at the precise moment the air beneath it was being taken away. Jack McCafferty did not see the consequences play out. On the 12th of January 1999, after a 2-year battle with cancer, he died at St Vincent's Private Hospital in Toowoomba, aged 84. The funeral was held at St Patrick's Cathedral. Over 1,000 people attended. Some arrived in a restored 1938 Bedford bus that Jack's son Tony had given his father for his 82nd birthday 3 years earlier. Tony McCafferty took the wheel. The family's controlling stake had begun to dilute through the 1900s as the company professionalised. Greyhound Pioneer Australia, McCafferty's national rival, was heading toward receivership. Tony was about to do something no Toowoomba company had ever done before. The minnow was about to swallow the whale. Chapter 7. The Minnow Swallows the Whale. In March 2000, McCafferty's Holdings Limited, the never-listed family company in Toowoomba, opened merger talks with Greyhound Pioneer Australia, the publicly listed national coach operator. The arithmetic was upside down. Greyhound Pioneer was older. Greyhound itself had been founded in 1928 by Russell Penfold in Toowoomba, of all places, during a Queensland rail strike. In 1992, Greyhound was merged with the older Pioneer brand, founded in Melbourne in 1905, sold to Reg Ansett in 1944, under Australian Coach Lines. The combined Greyhound Pioneer Australia had been the largest national coach operator for the previous decade. It was listed on the ASX. It had backpacker contracts, international ticketing, and a name every American and European visitor to Australia recognised on sight. McCafferty's was none of those things. It was a Toowoomba family company that had never floated on the ASX. It had no international ticketing system. Its name was unknown outside Queensland and New South Wales. It was the smaller, younger, regional operator. But it had cash. It had a profitable Queensland network. And it had Tony McCafferty, who could see what the ACCC could not. By November 2000, Greyhound Pioneer's creditors had placed the company in receivers' hands. A rival bidder, Premier Motor Service of Sydney, made an unsuccessful offer. In September 2000, the McCafferty's bid was accepted. The Toowoomba family company bought the national whale. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission cleared the acquisition without intervention. Chairman Alan Fells said there was sufficient scope for smaller operators to enter the interstate coach market, and that there are other modes of transport such as train that offer an alternative for consumers. The combined entity was named McCafferty's Greyhound Thai Limited. The McCafferty's gold and blue livery was painted across the former Greyhound fleet. The Toowoomba HQ was retained. If you have watched our Kenworth video, you know that Toowoomba has formed for this kind of inversion, the little Australian truck maker that outlasted its bigger American and British rivals. The McCafferty's deal was the same shape, with a twist. Kenworth Australia kept the Kenworth name. McCafferty's was about to make a different choice. By the end of 2000, the family company from Toowoomba was the only national interstate coach operator left in Australia. Tony McCafferty owned approximately 10%. ANZ Bank's commercial division had financed the acquisition. The Toowoomba foundry, 4 kilometres south, was still in business on a slow decline. Two Toowoomba transport empires were sharing the same town. Both had been founded by families. Neither family was in control anymore. The combined entity began trading as a single national company in the first quarter of 2001. The Toowoomba family had won. It owned the highway from Cairns to Perth. 3 years later, the family would sell, and the new owners would make a decision no Australian transport company had made in living memory. They would delete the winner's name from the side of the bus. Chapter 8. The Erasure. In late 2003, ANZ Bank's commercial division began discussions with the Chapman Group about the sale of the McCafferty family's remaining stake. The Chapman Group was the personal investment vehicle of George Chapman AO Cairns-based, surveyor by training, Order of Australia recipient. Fourth-generation North Queenslander, born on a family farm at the mining town of Mount Molloy. He had clerked for his bookmaker father at the racetracks as a boy, learning, in the language of his own official biography, much about human nature and how to manage risk. He had built Skyrail Rainforest Cableway in 1995. He had hosted the Queen of England on it in 2002. He chaired Telecasters North Queensland, 10 Network Holdings, TAB Queensland and the Cairns Port Authority. He was the principal force behind Cairns International Airport. In 2011, he would receive the Queensland Greats Award. In 2017, he would enter the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame. He was about to delete the McCafferty's name. By October 2004, the deal had closed. Tony McCafferty's stake, diluted from majority control in 1999 to approximately 10% at the point of sale, was bought out. ANZ Bank and George Chapman's Chapman Group of Cairns now owned the company. The rebrand mechanism was a 5-step boardroom process. Step 1. The new owners commissioned a brand recognition survey within weeks of taking control. Step 2. The survey was conducted nationally. Consumers in every state asked to identify long-distance coach brands by name and logo. Step 3. The results came back unambiguous in 2 directions at once. In Queensland and northern New South Wales, McCafferty's had higher recognition. In every other state, Greyhound did. Step 4. The board took the recommendation. For a company that intended to operate nationally, the Greyhound name was the more valuable asset. Step 5. In October 2004, the board voted to retire the McCafferty's name and rebrand the entire combined operation as Greyhound Australia. A former employee, writing later on busaustralia.com, summarised the board's reasoning. Greyhound was the better-known name in all states for a national company, hence the full rebranding to Greyhound Australia and decision for the red livery, etc. to give the company a new start. The McCafferty family did not control the company. They did not vote in the meeting. They did not give the company a new start. The new start was a deletion. The Toowoomba company that had beaten Greyhound Pioneer in the marketplace. The family company that had carried 2.5 million Australian passengers in a single year. The empire built by the mayor of Toowoomba chose to brand itself out of existence on the recommendation of a marketing report. Read that again. The gold and blue livery was replaced with red. The new colour scheme was painted across every depot, every uniform, every coach. The depot signs came down. Within 12 months, Motor Coach Australia, the Toowoomba bodybuilder McCafferty's had bought in 1999, was closed. The Toowoomba bodywork industry that had supplied McCafferty's for half a century lost its anchor customer. In 2006, ANZ sold its shares to Cordar Mentha. George Chapman consolidated control. In 2007, industry journalist Gordon Lowe wrote in Australasian Bus and Coach. Sadly, the McCafferty's brand is no more after 63 years on Australian roads. The decision was not made in Atlanta. It was not made in London. It was made by an Australian bank and a Cairns surveyor on the recommendation of a marketing survey. The name was not killed by a foreign villain. It was killed by the brand recognition data of a competitor that McCafferty's had already beaten in the marketplace. But the family was not finished. There was still a bus, and the bus belonged to a widow. Chapter 9. The Bedford. In 1938, the chassis of a 33-seat Bedford WLB bus was shipped from England to Sydney. The body was completed at Waddington's workshops at Granville on the 5th of April 1939. The bus was sold new to a Toowoomba bus proprietor named James Frayne. In October 1948, Frayne sold it to a partnership trading as Hume Street Bus Service. It stayed in revenue service until April 1979. After that, it was bought by a coach collector on the Sunshine Coast, Alistair Grant, who preserved it in a shed for 15 years. In 1996, Tony McCafferty, Jack's eldest son, bought the bus from Alistair Grant. He had it transported to the McCafferty's workshop at Anzac Avenue. He had the body stripped and resprayed in the McCafferty's first livery, white, with blue trim, the colours Jack had used on the 1940 Rio. On the 11th of March 1996, Jack McCafferty turned 82. The bus was presented to him as a birthday gift. The family staged a reenactment of the 1940 first run, with former employees in 1940s clothing, taking a route from the depot to Picnic Point and back. Jack drove the bus part of the way himself. When Jack died on the 12th of January 1999, the 1938 Bedford was driven to the funeral at St Patrick's Cathedral. Some mourners arrived in it. His estate passed to his widow, Lorna McCafferty. The 1938 Bedford was, after January 1999, the personal property of Jack McCafferty's widow. It was also, by an administrative error, still on the company asset register. In October 2004, when the family sold to ANZ Bank and the Chapman Group, the asset sale agreement transferred the company's vehicle inventory in a single schedule. Historical vehicles appeared on the same list as depot trucks. The 1938 Bedford was on that list. The transfer was clean. The widow's bus had just become an ANZ Bank asset. When the family asked for the Bedford back, on the basis that it was the personal estate property of Jack's widow, the response was a refusal. ANZ Bank refused. George Chapman refused. The refusal was repeated. Dee Thorley had been elected Mayor of Toowoomba in 2000 and was returned for a second term in 2004. She was the city's first female mayor. In 2005 or 2006, she made a formal request to the owners of Greyhound Australia for the 1938 Bedford to be returned to Lorna McCafferty and placed on permanent display at the Cobb & Co Museum on Lindsay Street. The owners refused. According to a contemporaneous report in Australasian Bus and Coach, the refusal came with the threat of legal action. The Mayor of Toowoomba was threatened with legal action by an Australian bank and a Cairns surveyor for asking for the return of a deceased man's bus to his widow. The bank that financed the deletion of McCafferty's name refused to return the founder's bus to his widow. The town's mayor asked formally. They threatened her with legal action. Read that again. The Bedford sat in storage. Greyhound did not display it. It was not lent to museums. For 17 years, the bus Jack McCafferty had received for his 82nd birthday, by then the legal property of his widow Lorna, remained in the possession of the company that deleted his name. If you've watched our Toowoomba Foundry video, you know about Austral 4946, the founder's hero engine, preserved in defiance of the closure. The McCafferty's Bedford was the same kind of artefact. The foundry's Austral was rescued by sympathetic owners. The Bedford was held by hostile ones. Until November 2021, when the bus appeared, with no warning, on eBay. Chapter 10. The Homecoming. In the second week of November 2021, the QOCS received a tip-off from a member who collected eBay listings. The 1938 Bedford was up for sale. The seller was Greyhound Australia. QOCS President Nick Wilson contacted Tony Hopkins, CEO of CDC's Regional Australia Division, the Australian arm of Singaporean transport conglomerate Comfort Delgro. Hopkins agreed to organise an emergency consortium, and he put out a call to Queensland bus operators. Verbatim, Tony Hopkins. The Queensland bus industry has been built on the back of family businesses, and this particular vehicle is an important piece of our history that needs to be saved. Donations were collected within a week. The successful bid was 45,000 Australian dollars. The consortium, coordinated through the QOCS, purchased the bus. The sale closed on the 22nd of November 2021. The Bedford was transported to Toowoomba. The named heroes are documented: Tony Hopkins of CDC, who organised the consortium, Nick Wilson, who coordinated the bid, and Warren Eckhart, the former McCafferty's workshop foreman, who had spent 30 years maintaining the Anzac Avenue Depot's fleet under Jack and Tony. In August 2022, the Bedford was delivered to its permanent display location, inside the terminal of Wellcamp Airport. The Toowoomba Airport opened in 2014 by the Wagner family. Nick Wilson said at the unveiling, "Home, for the first time since 2001. Tony McCafferty, then in his mid-70s, watched the unveiling with his brother John. When the ABC asked him what the homecoming meant after 17 years of refusals and threats of legal action, Tony McCafferty gave them 5 words, verbatim. "I can sleep much easier at night now." 5 words. 17 years. In December 2023, Greyhound Australia was sold by Cordamentha and the Chapman Group to Entrada Travel Group of New Zealand, owned 50-50 by the Ritchie family, who also own Intercity New Zealand. The Greyhound name was kept. On 30 June 2024, a Greyhound Australia coach was involved in a fatal crash on the Bruce Highway. 3 passengers died. The Greyhound name now carries the weight the McCafferty's name carried after Kempsey. The bus that started it all is parked inside Toowoomba's Wellcamp Airport. 88 years after the chassis was shipped from England, 17 years after it was taken from the family, 5 years after a community of bus operators bought it back. The name on the side reads McCafferty's, and on the side of every long-distance bus in Australia, except the one at Wellcamp Airport, the name reads Greyhound. Chapter 11. What Remains? What remains of McCafferty's in 2026 is a small list. The 1938 Bedford at Wellcamp Airport, McCafferty Park on the western edge of Toowoomba, St Patrick's Cathedral. The autobiography, McCafferty King of the Road, the Anzac Avenue Depot site, sold and redeveloped. The living characters are still living. Tony McCafferty is in his late 70s. Dee Thorley is still alive. Ray Walkden is still with the Volunteer Rescue Association. Warren Eckhart is still in Toowoomba. The 12-year-old girl who lost her father at Kempsey is now in her late 40s. George Chapman is also still alive. In 2011, he received the Queensland Greats Award. In 2017, he was inducted into the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame, 6 years after Mentha took the keys from his hands. His son, Ken Chapman, now chairs Skyrail and Tropical Tourism North Queensland. In 2026, George Chapman is still a life member of the Cairns Chamber of Commerce. The man who voted to delete McCafferty's was decorated, honoured and succeeded by his son. No banning order against ANZ Bank. No banning order against George Chapman AO. No heritage protection over the McCafferty's name. No heritage protection over the gold and blue livery. No heritage listing of the Toowoomba depot site before sale. 3 institutions, 3 failures, 1 deleted name. The Greyhound Australia name is still on the highway. The McCafferty's name is not. 3 lessons remain. Lesson 1. The winner can erase itself. McCafferty's did not lose to Greyhound Pioneer. McCafferty's beat Greyhound Pioneer, outlasted, outbid and acquired its rival out of receivership in September 2000. 3 years later, the new owners deleted the winner's name from every bus and replaced it with the loser's. The trophy was renamed after the team that lost. Lesson 2. The owner can betray the artefact. The 1938 Bedford that Tony McCafferty gave his father for his 82nd birthday became, by inheritance, the personal property of Jack's widow Lorna in 1999. 5 years later, it was sold to ANZ Bank by clerical accident. The bank refused to return it. The mayor of Toowoomba was threatened with legal action for asking. The bus that founded the empire was treated by the empire as inventory. It was freed by an eBay auction in November 2021, sold by the company that had once threatened a mayor for asking nicely. Lesson 3. The highway never forgets. On the 22nd of December 1989, a McCafferty's coach captain fell asleep near Kempsey, and 35 people died. 14 years later, to the day, the rebuilt coach crashed again near Rockhampton. On the 30th of June 2024, a Greyhound coach rolled on the Bruce Highway and killed 3 more. The name on the side has changed. The road has not. April 1940. Toowoomba. Jack McCafferty buys a 27-horsepower rig. October 2004. Toowoomba. The company he built deletes his name. November 2021. Toowoomba. A consortium brings the founding bus home, 81 years. One town. The mayor of Toowoomba built Australia's largest coach company from a milk cart. The Australian owners who came after his son deleted the family name. The town's mayor was threatened with legal action for asking for the founder's bus back. The Cairns surveyor who signed the deletion was decorated in 2011 and inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2017. This is not just the story of McCafferty's. It's the story of what happens when the winner chooses to forget itself.